Hello, and welcome to the Hypno Travelers on the Magical Psyche Highway podcast. That's right. Your host and tour guide is Scott Prevett, a healer, hypnotist, and a magician. And your bus driver is Jason Gobelli, also a hypnotist, an entrepreneur, and a spiritual guide. Disclaimer, neither Jason, Scott, or any of our guests here today are licensed professional psychologists or psychiatrists. So please don't make any changes to any medication or treatments that you are currently on based on the conversation that you hear here today. Just hop on the bus and enjoy the ride. Trip with us on the Inner Revelation bus. That's right.
Hi, I'm Jason. Welcome back to the Hypno Travelers on the Magical Psyche Highway. We are excited today, aren't we, Scott?
Heck yeah, we got a great guest for you guys all the way from across the Atlantic Ocean.
That's right. That's right. We're going across the big pond. Today we got the great Adam Cox. Adam, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing amazing. I'm doing really good. Thank
All
you
right.
so much for inviting me.
Oh yeah, we're
Welcome.
doing great today, especially now that we're get to travel down your magical Psyche Highway. So, shall we get started?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, big question, Adam. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so I'm a hypnotist, and I'm mostly well known for being a podcaster and a host of a podcast called The Hypnotist. So I feel like mainly what I do, and it's not the only thing that I do, is share real hypnosis sessions linked to real clients facing real issues, but I do it in such a way where I protect the confidentiality of those clients. So to the outside world, they get to hear real hypnosis, not these kind of guided meditation tracks that some people kind of publish, but the real hypnosis session for a real client, and that's kind of what I'm known for.
Nice, nice. So, your podcast is basically you working with clients.
It is, and I was inspired early on. You know, I suffered from very intense social anxiety as a teenager, and I wanted to kind of fix myself. And I felt that medication wasn't the solution, and actually learning how to change my emotions would be the right way of doing it. But on that journey of learning about hypnosis and therapy, there were two books that really had an impact on me, and that was the some of the transcripts of Milton Erickson's work. So where he would kind of be introduced to the client, figure out what the issue is, and then set some kind of quite interesting homework for them to do. And actually, the homework would almost be like a real life metaphor. And by doing that thing, it would lead to a breakthrough. And I found reading about the actual client interactions fascinating. And then there was another book, I think it was from the Connie Ray Andreas, that wrote a book called Magic in Action. And it was all about Richard Bandler's early NLP work. But again, it had the transcripts of the real interaction and the real kind of interventions, him working with clients. So at the beginning of COVID, when I thought, hey, I'm going to have a hypnosis themed podcast, I didn't want to do a training podcast. I think there's some excellent training podcasts out there already, like Brain Software with Mike Mandel. And I didn't want to do guided meditation sessions that were generic. So for me, it's like, what would I want to listen to is the real hypnotherapy that was used for a real client. And of course, there's confidentiality issues there. So I had to kind of figure out a way of doing it so you only hear my voice. But the beginning bit of each podcast is me kind of explaining the issues that the client was facing and then the hypnotherapeutic techniques I use for that client. And then you get to listen to the session. And there's two values to that. One is that if you're a hypnotherapist and you don't have too much experience, then you get to listen to someone with loads of experience actually and how they do their hypnotherapy. But secondly, if you are someone that can relate to the original client that I was working with, maybe you've got a similar issue, similar problem, then you get to benefit from the session that they paid for completely for free because your issue is close enough to the original client. So over the years, I think I've published about 1,800 hypnosis sessions, and it's a total reach of about 14 million people. And I could never have known that it would have had that level of impact. It was just me having fun making hypnosis sessions. But it gave me a clue that what I was doing was actually helping people, which, feels really good.
Nice, nice. So let me get this right. So they're paying you to actually be on your podcast?
Except they're not on the podcast. It's only my voice that's on the podcast, but it's the session I used for them that is kind of what gets published. And I'm a big fan of there's a phrase that Richard Bandler used in one of his early seminars about dovetailing outcomes, which is by doing one thing, you can achieve multiple things simultaneously. And there's these days social media experts that say, look, rather than uh, content creating, you should document what you do. So for me, what I was doing anyway for clients is recording my hypnosis session and sending it to them as a bonus so that they could listen to it again after the live session. But that gave me lots of intellectual property of my own voice being recorded. It was only my voice being recorded. And then that gave me an idea for the podcast of, well, maybe one other person out there in the world would also benefit from this recording. And that's why I share in the way that I do. So almost all of my clients know that there's a possibility that if they work with me, their session may end up being a podcast, but no one will ever know it was them. And they're kind of okay with that because that's how they found out about me as well. So in a way, it's this paying it forward idea that they get to work on their problem. And as a side effect, they might help a few hundred other people just by me working with them.
Nice, nice. So you said you're a metaphor guy.
Love
So,
metaphor. Yeah.
so are you the one creating the metaphor, or are the clients the one creating the metaphor?
I think it's a hybrid, in all honesty. I love when the client gives me a gift of telling me something that would just make a perfect metaphor. And some of these things map across. So I remember working with a client that was sexually abused in childhood, and I could tell in her background she was a big fan of Doctor Who, because I could see like a picture of a Dalek and all of this kind of stuff. So for her, instead of like standard timeline therapy or regression to cause, it made sense to have her step into the TARDIS. And the whole premise of the TARDIS is that you can go back in time and move to a different space. So for her, that was a perfect metaphor as a vehicle for regression, rather than just saying, go back in a disassociated way and see what happened. Like she gave me the gift. I was working with a lady the other day and she wanted to feel more prepared. And I asked her, is there a real or fictional character that you consider a very prepared person? And she said, Mary Poppins. So I'm like, you give me the gift here. I'm going to do a whole Mary Poppins inspired, preparation hypnosis session. And sometimes the client makes it so easy. And I do talks on metaphor, and sometimes I get metaphor from movies and books and ideas. But I feel like the client is the best ingredient for metaphor, because if the metaphor comes from them, they're already aligned with the metaphor and they're already invested emotionally in that metaphor. And then it becomes a gift for me because I don't have to think that hard. I can just weave my suggestions into the backdrop of their metaphor. And I prefer doing that than creating something new. But sometimes you have to get a bit creative, and I'll be working with the client and thinking like, does a metaphor even make sense? Or how can I use metaphor if it makes sense to for that particular client? So yeah, metaphor I think is great because it takes out the need to map exactly to the client experience. They fill in the gaps by making the metaphor their version of that metaphor for them.
Yes, nice, nice. So Adam, so you got this all going on and you got this big thing going where there's a lot of people watching you online and stuff like this. My question is when did you have that first like aha moment? Like, wow, I'm really going to be able to help people. What was
Yeah, I
that all
think
about?
what it was actually is that I had this severe anxiety as a teenager. Felt suicidal at some points. Felt very trapped by the idea of just kind of interacting with people, and did a form of kind of NLP and timeline therapy on myself because I considered two different futures, and that was a future if I continue to have this kind of level of anxiety, and what it would be like if I didn't. And once I knew that the future that I wanted was so much more desirable without all of that anxiety, then I became a man on a mission to figure out how to learn the stuff to do that. But actually, as a guy in my 20s, having learned a lot about hypnotherapy and NLP and applying it on myself, and I think it's a tragedy when people learn about this stuff and then don't actually use it in their own life. It's like having a superpower and not using it. But as a very shy, insecure guy in my teenage years, and being able to get myself in highly resourceful states in my 20s, I did what I think any 20-year-old guy would do. And I became very focused on making money, being financially successful, investing, setting up businesses. I wasn't interested at all, really, in helping other people. But when I became in my mid 30s, I learned about this Japanese concept called ikigai, this kind of like reason for being. And I had a successful PR agency at that point. I was earning good money, and it dawned on me that it wasn't fulfilling for me. I wasn't passionate about it. And I had three of the circles of ikigai. I was being paid for it, the world needed it, and I was good at it. But that final circle of being passionate about it, it wasn't there. So I asked myself the question, what things do I think about and learn with absolutely no financial motive at all? And it was psychology, it was hypnosis, it was NLP, it was kind of mindset related things. So I thought that's the area. And once that penny dropped, literally the next day I signed up for a postgraduate hypnotherapy course, did that for 3 years. But because I had a background in business, I was able to build a hypnotherapy practice that actually had lots of clients and quite high profile clients. And that gave me a certain level of credibility. The real thing that made the difference, though, was COVID. When the pandemic came and I wasn't able to see clients face to face, I thought, I still want an outlet for my hypnotherapy. I can't do that with clients. And then the podcast became the outlet. And it was actually seeing a movie called Limitless, and the movie had this kind of idea that you've got this Bradley Cooper character who takes this pill NZT, and by taking NZT, he then kind of activates all the power in his mind. And I thought that's a great metaphor for a hypnosis session, because it's kind of the premise that everyone likes the idea of how do they tap into more of their resources. And a lot of hypnotherapy is getting people in more resourceful states. So I just did a recording around that, and then I did a social media post where I said, "Hey, I've done this hypnosis recording based on the movie Limitless. If you want it, let me know." And rather than sending them the recording, I sent them the link to my podcast. And I had no idea what I was doing at that point, but what I was actually doing is training the algorithm to learn who to put my content in front of. I had no idea I was doing that. I just thought I was sharing a session that I was kind of proud of. But in doing that, the numbers went up, and it feeds on itself, because when the algorithm puts it in front of more people and people listen and they like it, then it puts it in front of more people and it kind of grows. And that's one of the main reasons that podcasts don't really grow, is because it's not the platform itself isn't putting it in front of people to find new audiences. And I'd accidentally found out a way to kind of do that. And where the real kind of feeling of I've made a difference was actually not when the numbers went up, but when I started getting messages from people that I'd never met. And they said, as a result of your hypnosis session, I've lost, 20 pounds, I've quit smoking. I actually sleep well at night. And for me, even thinking about those, I get the chills down the back of my head, because I was having a genuine impact on people that I didn't know, would never meet. But as a result of me just doing my hypnosis and getting it out there in the world, it was having an impact. And that just felt incredible. And that was the missing piece of the puzzle for me, because you can chase financial success and you could kind of chase those things. But unless you actually feel like you're contributing and having a difference, kind of feels meaningless. Whereas the moment you feel like you're actually doing something positive based on your particular skill set, that feels amazing. And I became addicted. And that's why I've done 1,800 episodes, because nothing can stop me now. It feels too good doing this thing.
So the techniques of your PR business really did come in handy then later
It
on
did. It
in
did
your
to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah, because again in COVID there was a bit of spare capacity. So what happened is, when my PR business, and there was about 20, 25 staff at that point, when they had no clients to work on, no campaigns, I would say, hey, get me coverage. So I've been featured on the BBC and in Vogue and, big national newspapers and TV channels and all that kind of stuff. And that really helps establish credibility. So when you're featured in the media, that gets you higher caliber clients. And when you work with higher caliber clients, that then again, to the outside world, it puts you in a position of credibility by association. So if they see you, and I even found that with my own family. Like, I was a hypnotherapist for a few years, but when I got featured in national newspapers, national TV, then my own family was like, "Oh, can you help me with this?" Like, they weren't interested before, but there was that element of social proof that when the national media were interested in me, well, now they're interested. But while I was just like this hobbyist, like they couldn't care less, if that makes sense. But that's the same thought process that goes through in everyone's mind. They want to work with people that are working with, other successful people. And they're like, oh, well, if the rich and famous are working with this guy, then it's safe for me to work with this guy too. And that psychology kind of maps across to everyone.
Nice. Nice. So of all these things, you've done so much. What are you most proud of?
Um, I'd say the podcast is a real feeling of kind of pride, but I would say the key thing I would say is getting out of that kind of trap of anxiety. I use the metaphor with clients, particularly those with really extreme anxiety, and I tell them I've been in that maze that they're in, and I had to figure my own way out of the maze, and I did that by obsessively learning. And it was learning about all these different therapeutic protocols and modalities. I was my own first client. I was testing every possible thing. But then you test enough and you learn, from that sensory acuity and reflecting, what works, what doesn't, and then you get better. So, but I meet people that have been in that maze for decades. And for me, I was in that maze for maybe a year or two. So I would say escaping that maze of kind of crippling anxiety and low self-worth, that's my proudest achievement. And I was on a podcast a few years ago, and they said, if you could go back to like any day in your past and re-experience it, what would you go? And they were expecting me to say like some amazing holiday or some like successful moment or the birth of my kids. And I said, I would go back to that day of crippling anxiety, like full on depression, low self-worth. And they said, why? And I said, if I experience that for a day as to how bad it is, every day of my normal life feels like paradise based on the law of contrast. And sometimes I've got to remind myself where I came from. I was an incredibly shy, inarticulate, kind of very paranoid person, and I don't feel that way anymore. And I think when people are looking for a therapist, they kind of they're looking for confidence that change is possible. And because I tell them about a real past that I experienced, and they see I'm not that person anymore, that gives them hope through evidence because they can tell I'm not that shy, anxious person that I used to be. And they can tell through the way I explain it that I definitely was that person because I mirror their experience too closely. Like they know what it feels like to have their heart beating, racing and really feeling like they can't do the thing they want to do. So I would say that's my proudest moment is having the tenacity and the focus to kind of know that I was in a bad situation and do whatever it took to get out of that. And I'm very grateful for that. So that makes me feel proud.
Nice. So with this obsession for seeking that knowledge and everything else that you're doing with your podcast and all this stuff, how's it affect that family life?
I mean, it's difficult because you need boundaries. But what I would say is that I'm very fortunate in the sense that being self-employed means and making the kind of money I made in my 20s. I don't know if I can use expletives on your podcast, but it gives you that kind of fuck you attitude.
Yeah, you can use whatever you want to use. This is your highway, not ours. So we're traveling
So
your road.
I'm beholden to no one.
Yeah.
I could stop working and never work again and still be fine. So everything I do is from choice, not a feeling of I need to pay the bills. I don't have to kind of compromise my values for some dickhead boss. I set the terms in everything that I do. And because of that, I'm able to kind of make time for my family. I'm able to kind of, literally, I'm in my studio here. I could almost see my house through the studio window. It's that close. So I've been able to kind of do things so that I work hard and I work long hours, but equally, I have got that time that I'm available. My children now are kind of teenagers, so even though I have the time, teenagers don't typically want to spend a lot of time with their parents anyway. But I know that I'm there if they need me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, are you using metaphor on them?
You know what? I would say every hypnotist knows that, and they can do magic with strangers and their own family that they're rolling their eyes and they're like, oh, come on. It never has the same impact because to them, I'm their dad. And in their, it's almost like, oh, but you don't understand. And I'm like, I literally see thousands of clients. Like I'm pretty empathetic. I understand how this stuff works. But to them, they see me first and foremost as a dad, sometimes as a disciplinarian. It has a whole different connotation. But when someone comes to work with me, I'm the person they've listened to sometimes for hours. Sometimes they've fallen asleep to my voice. So to them, I have an entirely different connotation. I'm like this kind of, oh wow, I'm speaking to that person that's been in my ears for all this time. So you have that kind of prestige and halo effect with strangers that you never have with kind of direct family members. And of course, sometimes I'll try and use like empowering metaphors and those kind of things, but it never has the same impact on my family.
Scott, do you have any questions you want to throw out here for Adam?
Sure. So, Adam, you've got the podcast, which is recording your case studies. Have you thought about a book, maybe, of case studies, kind of like what there to do?
Yeah, I've because I have two podcasts. So I have a podcast called Modern Mindset, and then I have a podcast called The Hypnotist. And on Modern Mindset, I've interviewed loads of authors, and you know, I I think that maybe one day I will create a book and those kind of things. But what I've found so far is that even a successful self-published book, if it can sell 5,000 copies, it kind of puts it in the top 1%. If I spend an hour to do a podcast episode, that gets me more than 5,000 audience like straight away. So I don't necessarily look at a book as um, a particularly good, useful element of my time. I do think it will come a time when it really is. But at the moment, I feel like my case studies kind of come from my podcast, and people they get a sense that they can tell because sometimes there's some really odd suggestions in the podcast, and therefore it clearly had to be for an individual because you'd never make a generic thing that specific. And my belief is that real hypnosis needs to be done with a person, and that's why I think the podcast kind of has the traction that it has because they know they're listening to something that was real. It had that kind of that synergistic loop between communication and responding to the head nods and those kind of things. Whereas a lot of hypnosis out there in the world, it feels like very generic in my opinion and kind of almost inauthentic. Like there's this kind of strange voice that some hypnotists use, and they're like, "And you're getting sleepy," and it's almost like they've got the magician's kind of voice. Where so it's a long way of saying right now I don't think it would be the best use of my time. However, I am building more courses for weight loss and because I was able to be quite financially successful, I figured out that one of the main reasons that impede people's ability to become wealthy isn't their intelligence or capability or even knowledge. It's certain belief systems and kind of fears that they have. So at that point, it might make sense for me to kind of create a book almost as a lead magnet, as an onboarding way to kind of introduce people to my courses. But just as a hypnotist, yeah, I think I'm going to leave the books to other people who are excellent writers, whereas I think I've got probably a face for radio and a voice for podcast. I think that helps me.
So what's
Where do you see yourself? Where do you see yourself 10 years from
It's difficult to say. I think it's a Buddha quote, which is something like, if you have a job or if you have work that you love, you never have to work a day in your life. And that's how it feels like for me. Like I'm having so much fun being a hypnotist, doing hypnotherapy, speaking at conferences, learning, and other hypnotherapists are great people. Like some industries are really kind of territorial and backbitey. There's a few egos in hypnotherapy, but generally, like the characters are super, super nice, super friendly. So, I think in 10 years, I may, I have a feeling on the trajectory that I'm on, I won't be able to see as many one-to-one clients as I'm currently seeing. And I think it will be more, you know, digital versions of me. Nobody knows what AI is going to have an impact on any industry right now, so we don't really know that. But I have a feeling I'm still going to be seeing clients, and I have a feeling that my core values are freedom and adventure. So I have a feeling that I'm going to be spending a lot of time traveling the world and doing cool things that I want to do. I think that's what my future looks like.
now? Awesome.
So earlier you said that you were working with true hypnosis is communication with an individual live.
Yeah.
Aren't in a way you kind of doing one to many anyway?
But I think it's different if there's a different kind of connotation. So if I did a kind of, if I was thinking of everyone listening at the point where I did the hypnosis, I think it has a different connotation. The fact that I'm doing it with the person and then lots of other people are listening to that, it makes it feel like people are kind of eavesdropping on a real hypnotherapy session that they could kind of benefit from, which has that kind of different connotation. And my first career was in radio. And what they said is that TV, it has the premise that you're speaking to everybody. But when you're on radio, it has the premise that you're speaking to that one individual. It feels really personalized. And I think I keep that from my background in radio of I'm speaking to the individual. So even if that's 10,000 individuals or 1 million individuals, it's still the individual that I'm talking to. And I think because of that, it has a different energy, it has a different flavor of the communication. And even the language, it's kind of like when you're speaking to lots of people, you kind of have to make it more generic to be inclusive to everyone. But when you're focused on one individual, you don't have to care about everyone. You just have to be hyper focused on the individual. Because for me, real hypnosis is the diagnostic ability to figure out what the core issue is or the calibration. So if you see certain kind of things like, a facial expression, like in a one-to-one session, I can be using a metaphor. And if they furrow their brow and kind of make an expression, I know that, okay, I might need to kind of steer the direction somewhere else. If you pick up on these ab reactions, whereas if the premise is one to everyone, then you're not bothered about any one individual because it's meant to be just for the majority. So I think my style of hypnosis is more me working with the person in front of me rather than a Tony Robbins doing it to 5,000 people on a stage. Like my archetype, I think, is more of um, almost like the magician. I want to create magic for that individual rather than the entertainer that wants to kind of put on a show. I'm not interested in putting on a show. I'm interested in creating real change for the person I'm working with.
But in essence, that creates real change in the ones that are watching too.
It does, yeah, as a byproduct. But I think the intention and the byproduct can be different. And my intention is to help the one person I'm working with. If as a byproduct of that, it then ends up helping more people, that feels like an incredible bonus to me because that was kind of the whole point of the podcast. When I set it up, it was a very low bar, and that is that if I can help one person um, as a result of them hearing my hypnosis that wouldn't have been helped had I not published that, it's all been worthwhile. And I've had hundreds of these messages. I think I have something like 2,000 reviews on Spotify. It's an average rating of 4.7, which means the vast majority of people really like the stuff. And sometimes you read through these reviews and they're kind of they still give me chills. It's kind of like it's not just love the show. It's kind of like have this problem, don't have this problem anymore. And that feels incredible. And it was never for them. It was for the person I was working with. But the byproduct of that is that it really did have an impact on someone out there. And I think, good therapy is expensive because a very skilled hypnotist or any therapist is going to be in demand and they can charge good rates because they're competent at what they do. Therefore, a lot of the people listening to my podcast couldn't afford to work with me directly, but by me making my hypnotherapy accessible, they're getting the equivalent of thousands of dollars worth of therapy absolutely free. And therefore, it's a valuable resource. And they might not be able to get that anywhere else. And what if what they're using before to cope is drink, drugs, or food, but now they don't need to because actually it's helped whatever the underlying issue was. It has this incredible ripple effect that I can never predict. I just have a feeling it's generally quite positive.
So where is your podcast at? Is it on Spotify? Is it on YouTube? Is it all over? Talk to me. How
Yeah, all
how can
over.
our viewers find you?
So if they look for The Hypnotist, you'll find it on Spotify, Apple. If you shout into your Alexa device, it will, uh, you'll say, play The Hypnotist. It's going to start playing the latest episode. It's on YouTube. And just recently, I migrated from audio podcast to video podcasts. So you can kind of see a little bit of a studio behind me. This is quite new. This is only a couple of months old. And it was created because I knew that I'd gone as far as I could using audio podcast and really wanted to make video. So on Spotify and YouTube, you see me as well as hear my voice. On all the other platforms, it's just the audio.
Nice. Nice. Pretty exciting. Is there a website we can send our viewers to?
Yeah. So there's actually my main website is adamcox.co.uk because I'm in England, so .co.uk rather than .com. And there, what you'll see is a load of free stuff that you can download. So free download, free courses, that kind of stuff. I'll send you a few links so you can kind of put it in your show notes as well. So if anyone wants, there's a free course actually that I created, which has some of my favorite hypnosis episodes, and that's called Transform Your Life in 7 Days. But the transform is spelt like hypnotic trance. So it's Transform Your Life in 7 Days, and that's completely free. So I'll give you a link and then your listeners can get that, without paying anything for it.
Nice. Wonderful. Scott, any more questions?
Adam, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule and sharing it with us. We really appreciate it.
Great. It's been a pleasure to go down the highway with you.
It's your highway, Adam. So let me ask you, Adam, do you have anything you'd like to add?
The only thing I would like to add is that if people are struggling with anything, there might be someone listening to this like really struggling with something. And when you've been struggling for something for a long time, there is this kind of element of learned helplessness that you think that because you've been struggling for something for a while that it's going to be difficult to change. And all I would encourage anyone listening that is struggling is to hold on to hope that it is possible to change, and you might find that change in an interesting place. And my podcast might help, but there's loads of other resources as well. So and in fact, in one final thing, whatever the thing is that if someone is struggling with, if they just put that in Spotify with hypnosis, chances are they're going to see my face, and there might already be a hypnosis session perfect for them that's completely free on one of these podcast platforms.
Now, Adam, let's step aside here outside of the hypnosis realm and stuff like that. Let's talk about you for a second. Not just hypnosis, but Adam, because we're on your highway. Adam, what are your words of wisdom that you could give to our viewers?
My favorite belief system is that you either win or you learn. And it took me a while to really believe that, because I was terrified of failing and I was terrified of falling short. But when I truly adopted the belief system that you either win or you learn, it freed me from making mistakes. It freed me from my own self-criticism and judgment of failing, because I looked at it like I either get the result that I want or I get the feedback to improve the probability of getting the result that I want. And I would say that's been such a useful belief for me that hopefully that becomes a bit of wisdom that someone else could kind of borrow and utilize in their life.
Nice, nice. Well, hopefully the kids use it, right?
I hope so.
That's right. Well, hey, it's been a pleasure. Scott, anything else?
Good.
Adam, anything else?
Yes, all good for me. Thank you so much.
Well, let me tell you, it's been a pleasure traveling down your magical psyche highway. We've certainly enjoyed it. It's going to be a great show. And for our viewers out there, we're glad you're here. We hope you liked us. Please subscribe. Please follow us. If you like us, give us a thumbs up. If you think we're assholes, we don't care. Just give us a thumbs down. We're glad you're here, and we hope to see you next week. Thanks for coming.
Wow, what a trip. Thanks for taking that journey with us today. Please like us, share us, and enlighten us with your views of the topics we drove into today. We appreciate you and love reading your comments. Thanks again, and we hope to see you back on the bus next week. That's right.